Hello and welcome to the Homeschool Moms Unfiltered Book Club episode for the week. Before you enter panic mode that is your inner voice being like, book club? How did I end up in a book club? I got to get out of here. I haven't read a book. What am I doing? Don't go anywhere. We will explain and you will love our book club.
Yes, explain we shall. But first, I'm your host, Amanda, and my fabulous co-host and fellow bookworm is...
Hello, I'm Megan.
So, yes, we host this book club with new episodes every Thursday, but you do not have to read the book if you don't want to. You can tune in and just listen to us pull out our highlights and key takeaways. We cover all sorts of topics related to parenting, homeschooling, and really all of the many different ways that those intersect.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is our second week covering our current book, and we always show up to book club. We're like, you don't have to read the book. You don't have to buy the book. And it's true. You do not. You are totally welcome here. If you never pick up one of our books, we do not judge. You can come and tune in and you're good. However, we said it last week and we'll say it again this week. This book, Soul School by Amber O'Neill Johnston, you're going to want this book, okay? Because not only is the book a message with incredible insight and Amber's writing style is ridiculous and the whole nine yards. It is the second half of the book is this epic reference where she breaks down book recommendations to build your library, to diversify your homeschool, to decolonize your bookshelf. So if diversifying your homeschool life is important to you, which if you found our secular progressive podcast, we're going to guess that that's probably on your list. You're going to want this book because you're going to pick it up and be like, oh, what are our books for the month? Or I'm about to go to the library. Let me grab this and take it with me and see what I can pick up or see what I can request. So we will link the book in the show notes below. You're going to want this book. It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so if you're new here, we are, again, Megan mentioned it, referenced it, we're secular. We are absolutely a progressive podcast. So this book, it's definitely our jam. And we were lucky enough to convince Amber to join us for an author interview during our regular podcast a few weeks ago. So if you haven't caught that episode, definitely go give it a listen. It was great. But today, we're going to be discussing chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Soul School. And let's be real, I have just as many notes this week as I did last week because I'm me. So we should probably jump in.
We should. I will excuse myself because I sound terrible. And if you're watching on video, at times you're going to watch me mute myself and cough up a lung or blow my nose because one of my kids brought home some funk and shared it. So there you go. There's a sniffle for you. Sorry, I missed it. I couldn't quite mute in time. Please forgive me, but I'm here and I'm excited to talk about the book.
Well, yeah. And honestly, this is reality, right? We're homeschooling parents. As much as we would like to be able to take a day off every time we're sick, that doesn't always happen. So, real life.
We power on.
Yep. Okay, so chapter 3 is titled Pain, Protest, and Pride. I'm going to be real and say that I was taking like a quote from every page. And then I was like, I have to stop. This book club will be like 3 hours long and no one wants to listen to that. So it started out that way.
Book.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
The message. You just need the book because it's that quotable.
Exactly. So I left quite a few quotes out. And for the most part, I'm just going to pull out quotes that really were really powerful or really resonated with me. So the first one, this chapter just starts with a couple of great quotes. She says, "Black is resilient. The story of our lives from Africa to North America, from long ago and just the other day, is constantly being challenged. Black history is seemingly optional to most curricula. And as we've seen lately, even undisputed facts are on the chopping block if it's determined that they may make children think critically about the past and how it impacts our present day." She goes on to say, "In some ways, the efforts to erase Black people from the main thread of American history have been overwhelmingly successful." And first I just thought it was really powerful. And it's so much in this book is stuff that if you really take the time to sit back and think about it, you're like, oh yeah, it's not necessarily new to me, but the way that she writes it, the way that she phrases it, the way that she puts it out there, it's really moving and also really makes you take the time to reflect. And then also I just thought, I would only imagine we recorded with her before Trump really kicked things off. And I can only imagine that this feels like even more true now with the end of DEI stuff and the quick removal of anything that would remotely look like supporting minority or marginalized groups by so many companies and colleges and things like that. It's really nutty and unfortunate. And yeah, I'll try
I
not to
know.
go all like hardcore advocacy right now, but yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. And I think it's just so it's funny because I wrote down the same quote that you started there. And it talks about campaigns to sanitize school textbooks, suppress compelling parts of our story. And I'm quoting Amber when I say our story. I don't mean Amanda and I, our story. We are two white women, and create a mandatory body of general educational knowledge that isn't dependent on knowing much about our existence or influence are remarkably well executed. And I just thought, like, how many times does history have to repeat itself? How many times? And I don't get how people don't see it. Like, I just don't understand. And we picked this book to read at this time before we even knew that he was going to win the election. I mean, that's how long it's been on our schedule. The minute we saw Amber had a new book coming out, it went on the schedule because her original book was so amazing. And so we didn't know we were going to be reading this at this time, but crap, like,
Well,
how many
and we
times do we
had
have to do this?
Yeah. And we had no idea the actual content of the book, and how applicable it would be. It's, again, we are surprisingly good at putting our books in a way that work really well with our actual episodes or with current events. And it's all luck. We're not that organized. We're not that politically savvy or marketing PR savvy. It comes together nicely. But I agree. And for me, I feel like history repeating itself this time is extra inexcusable because in the past, you were trying to let people know about things via telegram or,
Right.
like letters that took months to arrive and may not have made it because they got censored or whatever. Like, we have so much connectivity. There is no way that you don't have access to information and the rest of the world is screaming at the top of their lungs. And we're all like, no, 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 we know what's best. And we're going to ignore everyone else. Not us personally. When I
Right.
say we Americans, there are too large of a percentage of Americans. All right. But yeah, history repeating itself. So my next quote was on page 29. And again, quoting Amber and the book directly, she says, but our presence prevents it from being eradicated. Our very bodies are an ever present reminder of what happened on this soil, and no amount of rearranging and cleansing will change that. Our DNA tells a fact-based story that our hearts and minds cooperate. And for as long as we have breath, our history will endure. And again, it's just one of those examples. Like, she's such a great writer. It's so moving and powerful. Really good.
Yeah. And then I think we have similar notes for the next one on page 30. I'm not sure. I'm not looking at the book. We talked about last week the fact that we both only have an ebook copy that Amber sent us ahead of the book launch, and we've both ordered a copy of the book for ourselves so that we have a physical copy, but neither one of us is home right now. We're both traveling, and so we're still working off the ebook. So I don't have it in front of me to know which quote of ours is higher up on the page, but the one that I quoted here just says, this comes from the book. Amber says, in James Baldwin's collected essays, he wrote, it took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on this earth as though I had the right to be here. So I recently left a position that I'd held at Outschool for a really long time, where I was overseeing the inbound social media content that came through. So I wasn't the one pushing content out on our social media channels. It was comments that were coming in, right? And Outschool advertises classes and things like that. And Outschool is a fairly progressive company overall. And so we would get comments on Black history classes and things like that. And there's this subsection of really gross people who think that teaching your children accurate, inclusive history teaches them to be ashamed of their whiteness. This is a thing. This is an unbelievable thing. And so when I read that quote, I'm like, okay, first of all, that's not true. That's ridiculous crap. But let's just assume that that was true, right? And that teaching your children accurate, inclusive history teaches them to be ashamed of their whiteness. The opposite teaches a person of color that their very existence is shameful. So why is your child more worthy of feeling valued, validated, good about themselves than this other person? Why is that the case? That's already happening to Black Americans in our culture. It's not happening to your white child. You know, it's really, really not. And so when I read this, I was
trying
like,
to tear down white supremacy? Because I mean,
they're struggling right now. Really, they're really. It's a tough moment for white supremacists. Just we have Nazis marching through cities.
Yeah, it is so hard for them to get recognition. They're not on the national stage. They're not in the White House.
My heart will go out to you. I swear. That's what I was trying to say. I was just telling them that my heart was with them.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, like you said, on that same page, I had pulled out another quote, and it says, quote, "It's impossible to tell the story of America without including Black people, not a little, but a lot. Our sacrifices and contributions, those stolen and those freely given, are so inextricably woven into the genesis and the rise of United States of America that anything less than complete integration into the fabric of the historical context, into the fabric of the historical record is unsatisfactory." And, it wraps around that whole idea, like, you want to be proud of America. You want to, have any sort of country pride or go as far as nationalism. Okay, fine. But you can't, you don't have United States of America without immense, sacrifices and contributions from the Black community. And just trying to pretend like that's not the case. I don't know. I don't understand. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I saw a really interesting analysis. So we're recording this 5-6 days after the Super Bowl of 2025, right? And there's just that one line in Kendra performance about 40 acres and a mule, right? And there was a comparison. I watched this analysis of it online, and somebody was talking about this promise of 40 acres and a mule that, of course, was never realized to freed individuals. And then they were talking about the kind of the Midwestern land grab and how people were able to go and claim 160 acres for themselves. And how, on the one hand, you had people who now had access to land, and it's that beginning of generational wealth for so many white families in this country. And then the starting line being moved even further back yet again for so many people of color in this country, right? And so we just see this time and time again throughout history. And Amber's book is not all doom and gloom. I don't want to put that out there like that is. I mean, there's brilliance in here about art and culture and music and joy and all of these other things. But just because of the disastrous state of the world right now, that kind of popped into my head when it came to what you were saying about there is no history of this country without Black Americans. It's impossible to tell an accurate story or provide an accurate picture of this country without that. And that is the reason why it's left out so often, is because it's not one that makes America look shiny and squeaky and amazing all the time, which is the image that roughly half the country loves to portray.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Okay, so on the next page, there were a couple of quotes. They're spread out a little on the page, but I pulled them both out because I felt like, let me just read them first. So it says, "Soul School is not a deconstructed textbook. and the books that cover major historical events and the people who lived through them are not presented in a neat chronological box. Instead, the history is intermingled with inspiring poetry, uplifting storytelling, incredible fantasy and sci-fi worlds, and stunning art as part of a grand story. And then a little further down the page, she goes on to say, among the tougher topics are uplifting stories of creativity, ingenuity, and joy. We have an expansive history. We were thinkers and doers before, during, and after the worst times. Black American culture is dynamic and innovative. And for every story of struggle and pain, we have a counter story of perseverance and progress. And for me, I was just like, this page 31, like kind of outlines the second part for me, the second half of like why you just need this book. Like you need to own this book because you need this resource in your home for probably, honestly, yourself. If you are an adult who grew up in the United States or probably really anywhere in the world, you probably did not get this level of history and education that you needed. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with reading young adult books to get that, right? Like these are great books, great stories. And then absolutely, do better with your kids, do better with our kids. They deserve it.
Yeah.
All of this talk, they deserve it. They deserve to know real history.
Well, and also at this point in the American timeline, it's an act of resistance to be going to the library and requesting these books or to be ordering them online and bringing these into your homeschool. This is an act of resistance. This is one way that you can fight back against what's going on in a time when it's, I think, pretty easy to feel powerless. So I feel like that's important as well. I will add, when I read that section, I did love from the unschooling perspective. So I'm a history nerd. I love history. It's totally my jam. I'm not a fan of learning history in a chronological order of like, that's how I learned history in school, right? In 1842, this battle was fought by this general at this battlefield. And then in 1872, this battle was fought aboard this ship and blah, 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 right? And you see so many people in Facebook groups who are like, oh, I can't stand history. How am I going to teach my kid history and like this and that? Okay. I think part of the reason a lot of us can't stand history is because of the way it was taught, right? It was brutally boring. It was just dates and battles and ugh. And you can teach history in this most incredible way that involves these amazing stories. I mean, some historical fiction is more accurate than others. You do have to vet historical fiction. Amber has done that here for us. But if you're going to expand beyond this and bring this school of thought of learning history into other aspects of your life, you do need to vet your historical fiction. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is an amazing example of shit historical fiction that should never be used as it's not historical fiction. It's just fiction and fantasy and crap, right? That should not be used as a lesson, but there's plenty of other books that should be. And so I just love the idea of being able to learn history in a way that's not dry and awful and boring, because it makes you want to learn history, and history is amazing. So.
Okay, so then on page 32, she starts talking about African kingdoms and how when kids study the Middle Ages, they learn about Europe and like medieval Europe and all of that stuff. And she said that, they also really need to be learning about the flourishing societies of West Africa, because that's where Black American history begins. It does not begin at enslavement. So I just want to take a quick moment to say, if your history doesn't include these West African societies and really others in the Americas, Asia, the Pacific Islands, etc., please, please, please find a new history spine. Whatever history you're using, like it's not cutting it, and you need to find something else. Something like History Quest or Curiosity Chronicles would be a great place to start. There are obviously others out there, but both of those for sure absolutely cover other societies around the world, not just Europe. And this is so important, right? Like if you're listening to us and you've noticed that you didn't learn about Mali or any of the other West Africa societies that she's talking about, like, that's okay. When you know better, you do better. But now you know better. So please go do better.
Yeah.
So like I said, I had to stop myself. I was pulling out like quotes on literally every page under every section. And I stopped myself. Go and read. She's giving not a ton of context, but really solid context on kind of a timeline of history. And again, this is just one of those, like, you should get it. You should read it. It's very helpful. You should have your kiddo read it before you actually start reading all of the books in the second part that we're going to cover next week. But the sections that she kind of goes over next are the transatlantic slave trade. I feel like there's some coverage of that in most history curriculum, for better or worse, chattel slavery and rebellion. I couldn't help myself. I did end up pulling out a quote from that section. And
I
it
pulled
says,
the same one though. Look, did you notice?
oh no, I haven't had a chance to review the notes. So the quote says, for many children, most of their meager Black history education will come from this era. They learn that Black people were captured in Africa, brought to the United States and other places against their will, forced to pick cotton, and eventually freed. That's all true, but it's grossly oversimplified, and the details matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that quote stood out to me because of my own education. So, especially when we lived in North Carolina and we homeschooled there, our homeschool co-op that we belonged to was amazing. And we had these different fairs throughout the year. We had geography fair. Again, I don't feel good, so my brain's not working. We had history fair, geography fair, science fair, living museum. And so we would rent out this hall and the kids would do a trifold board and do a display on whatever they wanted to within that thing. So like for history fair, like one of my kids did D-Day, and for geography fair, they all did countries related to our heritage, which was really cool. And kids would bring a food that went with the geography of that country, and kids would go around and read the boards, ask questions, have a snack. It was awesome, right? So my middle child, who's an artist, decided that all of her projects would always relate to fiber arts in some way, shape, or form. And she got really creative. Geography fair was Peru because there's alpacas there. Science fair, she did how different fibers take up dye at different rates. So anyway, for the history fair one time, she did the cotton gin, the invention of the cotton gin. And I was like, okay, great. So she goes off, she researches, she does all this research on the cotton gin, and she comes back to me and she's got all these notes and she's sharing the notes with me. And I'm sitting there going, girlfriend, where did you get this from? Like, this is, because you don't know where they're researching online. And she was much younger at the time. She was probably 10 or 11. And so, can she decipher fact from fiction online? And I'm like, none of this sounds accurate. Where did you get this from? And she shows me her sources, and they were legit freaking sources. So she's going on and on about how the cotton gin was horrible for the lives of enslaved people and how it bolstered slavery and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, girlfriend. I'm like, the cotton gin made life easier for people who were picking cotton, right? Like, but this was my education. I literally had to go back to my I'm still very good friends with a girl that I went to school with. And I messaged her and was like, what did we learn about the cotton gin in school? Because I was under the impression that it made life easier. Because then the cotton gin, if you don't know, separates the white fluffy stuff from the seeds. And then the seeds get replanted and the white fluffy stuff gets sold. Okay. And so I'm like, yeah, because they didn't have to separate it by hand anymore. The machine did it. How amazing is that, right? Oh, yeah, no. Capitalism being what it is, these plantation owners were like, okay, if it's that much easier for the machine to separate out the cotton, I need a shit ton more cotton because I can make more money. And if I need a shit ton more cotton, I need people picking that cotton. And so there's statistics of the number of enslaved people being brought into the United States that skyrockets when you look at bar graphs at the time that the cotton gin comes into existence. And so it actually was one of the worst things that could have happened. This is not the education that I had. at all, right? And so what we think we know, so much of it isn't even true. It's this horrifically whitewashed version of it. I ended up going
To
down this
help you
huge.
feel good. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, somebody invented this machine to help people do their jobs more easily. Isn't that amazing? Right?
Yeah. So
Holy
just tie it
crap.
up in a neat little bow and move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she and I ended up, we found a cotton gin we went to go see. We ended up going down this huge rabbit hole. And so most of the legitimate history that I have learned alongside my kids while homeschooling, because what I learned in school, even if it was accurate, I don't know that it was accurate because so much of it wasn't, that I don't know what I can trust anymore.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's so true. Okay, so she I was telling you she was going through kind of like a timeline. She specifically says the second half of the book isn't in this kind of timeline, but she wants to give you some context, a kind of chronological context. And so the next sections are the Civil War, some great information in there that I did not know. Reconstruction, which there's a quote in there that talks about Reconstruction being decades of disappointment and like the promise of what could have been but got stopped. And we have been learning a few other things in our homeschooling this week that really highlighted that for me. Then there's the talk of the Great Migration, which Meagan was kind of referencing earlier, and then the Harlem Renaissance, which we did a small study on just a week or two ago as well. Then from there, you've got the Great Depression. Again, some great context she provides there. The civil rights movement. This is kind of that other area, right, where we probably all learned about MLK Jr. and Rosa Parks, but what else do you know? And then the Black Power and Black arts movements. And I thought her take on that was really good. And I will 100% admit that I had never thought of it that way. And I'm a little ashamed and embarrassed to admit that. And I'm glad that I reread it again. We read this book before for our author interview with her, and reading it for this week's book club, this section really stood out and I got a lot more from it. So I foresee this being one of those books that you read more than once to make sure you really take away all the things you need to take away from it. But to that end, on page 37, there was a quote that I pulled out. She says, selectively choosing which stories to tell our children based on our fears or opinions of their morality is disingenuous indoctrination. The United States was founded by revolutionaries willing to shed blood to gain the humanity they felt was owed to them. And then she goes on to say, exploring complicated history is not scary. It's refreshing because the past illuminates the present and gives us a greater sense of humanity. And it's just one of those things. It was a really great point. I think we forget about that. There's a lot of hesitancy in covering the Black Panthers and that whole movement. And this, she handles it really well. I think she handles everything really well. I'm really envious of her ability to handle things as well as she does. And also in the position that we're in, and also just in all of these Facebook groups that we're in online, right? So often you see a lot of adults really struggling with this, and the grown-ups who are homeschooling, the grown-ups who are not homeschooling but wanting to supplement properly. Like, we're struggling with it, especially right now, but it is reality, right? It is true. And and, and you have to cover things that make you feel uncomfortable. You have to cover those things because they're important.
Yeah, for sure. The questions are going to be difficult, but if we are avoiding the difficult questions, we're skipping really, really, really essential parts of history.
Yeah, absolutely. And then she does go on. The last section in here is about the Black Lives Matter movement. And it had some really great, it's quick, it's short, right? But it had some really great info and good statistics that I thought were really interesting. So again, like this is, I have never before said like you absolutely have to own this book on your shelf. And this is one like everyone who listens to our podcast should have this book. They should read it. Their kids should read it. and they should hold on to it so they can reread it later.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked about what an amazing writer Amber is, and 1000% yes, right? And I thought that was really evident on pages 38 and 39, where she talks about the fact that she was buying some necklaces for some friends that had book covers on them. And her daughter was like, oh, that's super cool. I want one. And one of her favorite books is called A Picture of Freedom, The Diary of Clottie, a Slave Girl by Patricia C. McKissack. Sorry, Amanda and I always struggle with names, and I wanted to go slow with that one and hopefully get it right. And so it caught Amber off guard because she was like, I don't particularly want my child walking around with something around her neck that says slave girl on it. And I'm paraphrasing, and I'm going to do it poorly because nobody's as eloquent as Amber. But her basic premise was this book is so traumatic in so many ways, and so dark in so many ways, and so heavy in so many ways. Why would you want a necklace with that information on it? And her daughter was like, no. She said, I see it as resilient and power and this and that. And she was on her 13th read through of the book. And Amber was like, oh, okay. And saw it completely different than her kiddo did. And they came to an agreement about the necklace, etc. But I thought it's just such a powerful thing for us to realize that the way we interpret things is not always the way our kids are going to interpret things. And if you have multiple kids, not all of your kids are going to interpret something the same way either. And so to really be having those conversations becomes so essential to make sure that you're understanding their thought process and all of it. It was brilliantly written, and it really made me think differently about some of those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we have tons more to discuss, and we don't want to take time away from Amber's book because, as Amanda likes to say, she has oodles of notes. But we do just want to give you a quick reminder that we host a Patreon account, and we've tried to make it super affordable for anybody who wants to come and hang out with us over there. There's 3 levels of support. The first one is a $5 support level, which is kind of like if you subscribe to anybody on Substack or anything like that, just kind of like a thanks for your content. I enjoy it. Keep it up. We appreciate your small business kind of level of support, and we always appreciate that. Ironically, my friend that I mentioned earlier from high school, who I called about the cotton gin, I subscribe to her Substack. So there you go. She's an amazing writer. Totally different genre than Amanda, totally different genre than Amber, but amazing writer. Then we have a $7 support level, and these are all US dollars, by the way. $7 support level, which gets you a vetted, secular, progressive, own voice focused unit study every single month. We typically pick a theme for a month or a historical event that happens in that month and rock that. So recently we've done Japanese internment during World War II. We've done women in medicine. And if I do say so, they're pretty freaking awesome. They're really engaging and hands-on and provide tons of resources for you to be able to dig into. So we hope you would enjoy that. And we have one more level of support. I don't know if you can hear the dogs wrestling in the background. If you can, I apologize. But our last level of support for $12 a month includes all that other stuff. But then also we have 2 live meetings per month. We actually hosted our Q&A session last night where you can come and you can ask any questions you want to about homeschooling, world schooling, parenting, whatever. And we will be happy to answer all of your questions. Sometimes we cover a topic in general in the podcast, but then you want to know how to specifically apply that to your lifestyle, your kid, your experience. Come, let's talk about it. And then our other live meeting each month is a social where you can just come and find other progressive homeschoolers. I know for me, being able to socialize with other homeschool parents where I don't have to fix my face when they start bitching about critical race theory or talking about Bible study is worth its weight in gold because that's all I can find locally. So come, online friends are valid friends. Amanda and I met online, right? I mean, we've been friends for like 4 years and we met one time in person about a week and a half ago. Okay. So you can definitely form solid relationships online. So we invite you to come and do that. We will link our Patreon below and we will put a 90% coupon code in our show notes as well. So come and join us. We'd love to welcome you. We'd love to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to second that. I have made a great group of friends that are other progressive homeschooling parents. We met in a book club that we were doing, but I have another group of friends that are from one of those birth month clubs. If you're in the United States, you probably know what that is. But we are great friends. I have some great friends in there. Some of them I've met, some of them I haven't met. And, we're going on 12 years of friendship at this point. And it's that thing of like, well, if you ever make it to SoCal, like let me know. And if I ever make it to Toronto, you can make really solid friendships virtually these days. It's not that different from pen pals back in the old days,
Yes. Oh my gosh, I've said that before, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
no
a
one was
great
like, "Oh, you
analogy.
can't have a friend who's a pen pal." Like yeah, you totally can, and you can have friends that are online. Like,
Yeah,
not everyone is out to catfish you.
it's totally doable.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so back to the book. We are starting with chapter 4. It is called Birds with Wings. So it kicks off with, well, pretty early on, there's this thought-provoking quote. At least it was for me, right? So it says, Virginia Hamilton, the late author of M.C. Higgins, the Great, heralded for preserving Black oral tradition through children's literature, once said that storytelling was the first opportunity for Black folks to represent themselves as anything other than property. Considering the weight of that sentiment, it's easy to see why soulful storytelling is in our bones. Soul School draws on this legacy of telling stories in our own words, trusting that the fullness of our voices will ring clearly from every direction. Yeah, and like I said, it was just one of those quotes that I was like, oh,
That's
yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
That is really powerful. Yeah.
Yep. So then on the next page, on page 41, she says, quote, all readers need to see Black characters outside the realm of racism, slavery, Jim Crow, and police brutality. And Soul School explores various paths towards that goal. And I just thought, like, I mean, yes. And she's covered it many times. She covered it in her interview with us. We've talked about it various times while covering this book. Hopefully, we're all on the same page about the importance of, if you really want to learn about Black history, Black American history, African American history, it cannot just be in the context of the bad things that happened. It has to be more, because no people, no marginalized group is just about the worst things that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved this breakdown that's here. And I particularly made notes of Afrofuturism and African futurism, because those are terms that I had never even heard of before. And so to really be able to dig down into that, I mean, how do we, as people who did not have a complete education on these topics, and this isn't our culture, how do we begin to pass it on to our kids without a handbook or a manual of sorts to tell us even that these things exist, right? I don't know to expose my kids to things that I don't know exist. And so this is like a manual for me to help fill the gaps in my own education and then do better by my own kids, which I love.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you alluded to it. The next several pages, she runs through a bunch of different types of literature that she's going to recommend in part 2 of the book. And so those included Afrofuturism and African futurism. I'll let you explain a little bit more about what those are, because they were new to me also. Then she also highlights biography and memoir, drama, folk tales, fantasy, historical fiction, historical nonfiction narrative, mystery and suspense, and visual storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. So I made a note. I'm going to have to like lean way in, because I took a screenshot of it from the book, and Google Docs isn't letting me zoom in and expand it. So it's tiny, but it says Afrofuturism and African futurism. It says the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture defines Afrofuturism as an evolving concept expressed through a Black cultural lens that reimagines, reinterprets, and reclaims the past and present for a more empowering future for African Americans. Black writers and artists utilize themes of technology, science fiction, fantasy, and heroism to envision stories and futures of Black liberation to convey an authentic, hopeful, and culturally expansive image of the Black experience. These highly imaginative stories are steeped in Black culture and often history. Technology and evocative characterization assist in imagining a future of Black liberation that accounts for, but moves beyond, historical fact and present day conventions. To read this type of literature opens children's minds to ideas, structure, and language they're unlikely to encounter elsewhere. And I thought that was really cool because there are some people in all cultures and walks of life who can envision things that don't exist, right? This is how we have inventors. This is how we have innovators. These are those people. But they're not the vast majority of our population. So a lot of people struggle to imagine beyond what exists, or maybe they can go 2 or 3 steps beyond what exists. But to really disrupt something so wholly and so completely takes a very special type of person. And so I thought, how amazing that there's a genre of book that does that and kind of connects those dots and leads people a little bit closer to imagining the possibilities that exist.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm curious. uh, I think I remember when we did the first read of seeing a couple books there mentioned that I was like, I bet those are the books that have that. And they caught my attention because I had gotten them from the library for my kiddo to read. So I'm really curious to go back and really dive into that and see what other options there are.
Very cool.
So the next few pages, she then goes into literary themes that you'll encounter again and again. And the ones she specifically highlights are the freedom struggle, Black identities, Black experience in history and memory, and family and community. And then when I read through it, I felt like she doesn't actually say it, but for those of us who are on the outside looking in, I feel like it's important to highlight that another one that she really wants you to take away from this is Black joy. This idea that like it's not all the sad stories, it's not all the horrific stories, right? There's joy in being Black, in the Black experience and culture.
Yeah. I mean, that's in the tagline of the book. So that's
Yeah.
definitely a huge focus point for this whole experience, which is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so then that brings us to chapter 5. It is titled Rock Stars and Readers. And essentially, the idea is that like authors should be considered rock stars. They should be treated like rock stars. And, I mean, obviously, we run a book club, so we can get behind that.
I used that analogy years ago. I took my oldest kiddo, I mean, he was way younger, to a book signing with Rick Riordan, who wrote Percy Jackson. Yeah. And I joked that it was like the footage that we see of when the Beatles came to America and they were on the Ed Sullivan Show for the first time. And you had these girls like passing out at the airport and whatever. That was the experience. It was like this horde of literary nerds. I mean, the number of orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts. And when he came out, it was like the Beatles coming to America. It was, and that's not my genre of reading, and I've never read his books, so I didn't have that sort of personal connection to him. So I viewed it through the lens of my own kid. And I loved seeing my own kid have that experience, but it wasn't my experience to have. I was just like, how cool that must be for him to walk out on stage and have this incredible reaction from people. I'm like, yeah, that's so stinking awesome. It was the most surreal experience. I loved it.
That is fun. Okay, so I'm me. So of course I've got a quote to kick off chapter 5. I pulled it out just right at the very beginning. It says, when reading books on African American culture, the storytellers are as meaningful as the stories themselves. The Black authors and illustrators that we've lost and the ones that are still gifting us today have personal histories that inform their works. And this is kind of that fundamental idea of own voices in literature. Hopefully, if you're listening to us, if you're listening to this specific podcast, you understand the importance of this. If it's a new idea to you, it is important to read own voices and to see things that are illustrated by people who are of that marginalized community, whatever that is. So please keep an eye out for that. when you decide to take what you've learned in this book and apply it to any other community?
And if that is a new concept for you, I don't have a counter running of how long we've been recording today, but we're probably like 40 minutes into this discussion or whatever. That probably isn't the first thing that's been new to you throughout this thing. And you're here and you're sticking it out and you're learning something new, which is freaking awesome. So
Yeah.
go you.
Yep, that's true. Learning new things and figuring out a different way forward, it's hard work. It's
Yeah.
really good work, but it's hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so then the next kind of thing that I pulled out was on page 53. Again, I'm quoting Amber. I'm a white woman. I will be really clear about that. She says, "When we speak to our children about heroes, we name freedom fighters, scientists, athletes, and community leaders. But how would we know the greatness of these figures if not for the heroes penning and drawing their way through their stories? What about the lives of the artists, poets, and writers themselves? They are the keepers and communicators of the stories. Their work and lives are heroic." I
Yeah.
never thought about that, right? Like I'd never thought I'm like I mean I read a lot. I'm a big reader. I'm glad we have writers, but I've never really put it in that kind of context. So that was a fun context for me.
I hadn't thought of it in the way that Amber put it out there, but it's that thing. And we're seeing kind of memes and stuff about it right now being passed around, that one of the first things that dictatorships and things like that do is muzzle the intellectuals, right? And so professors and things like that and writers have always been on that list, right? The people that are writing the truth are so dangerous in an environment like that. So yeah, on the flip side, it works that they would also be the heroes that do that. I mean, even if you think about like underground publications and things throughout history that have transformed history by spreading written communication, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. On the next page, she starts a discussion of underground literacy schools. The actual like underground literacy schools idea, it really threw me for a loop because I did know on a smaller scale, like, we've read about different people who were taught to read, or like this person would sneak in and give them weekly reading lessons, and they knew it was really dangerous if they got caught, but it was the key to their freedom. So I knew that that was happening. And I'm kind of insulted that I was never taught the fact that it was happening on this big scale when that this was part of their resistance and how important it was. Because you know me, I'm a huge like pro reader and all of that.
There was a quote on 55 that correlated to the underground literacy schools that I thought it was really striking. Like it wasn't new information, but it was just one of these things that made me sit back and be like, how the hell can anybody question the existence of privilege or claim that the playing field is level when you look at this history, right? This is 150-ish years ago. And it's not to say that it ended 150 years ago, just this phase ended 150 years ago. Then it evolved into other ways of holding an entire community back from knowledge and education in the ways that other people had access to it. So Amber says in her book, perhaps this commitment to accessing and sharing stories can't be seen more clearly than in the history of underground literacy schools. Before the Civil War, African Americans were forbidden from reading and writing for fear that they would gain ideas for liberation and navigate society more easily. After Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, white people intensified their efforts to prevent education among enslaved and free Black people, and the anti-literacy laws of the time dictated stiff punishment for enslaved people learning to read and those caught assisting them. Despite this dehumanizing prohibition on learning, some Black people continued to find ways to gain knowledge, often at significant personal risk. And again, it's not newsworthy per se in that sense, but the way it's written was just so striking. We do have people in the world today who are like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Everybody has an equal opportunity kind of bullshit, right? And it's like, no, I mean, even Amber brought up when she came, she brought up a book that it was an example that she gave, and it was written by the same author who wrote Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. And the person's name is escaping me at this moment, right? But okay, so this is talking about the 1830s, the 1850s, right? Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is set in the mid 1900s. And there's a thing in the beginning of the book where these Black students sit down in their segregated school and they've got quote unquote new books and they're so excited, right? And they open them up, and in the front, there's this chart that says, like, 1940 new, 1941 excellent condition. And it's breaking the school year down and it's listing the condition of the book. And then at some point it goes to, like unusable, whatever the terminology was. And then the line below said like Negro or something like that. I forget the exact word that they used. So yeah, this is 150 years ago, this time period that Amber's referencing, but we're talking the time period that my mom was a kid. This is what's happening. How can anybody claim that the playing field is level and that anybody has equal opportunity? Like, we are so far from that. And for our kids to go out into the world realizing that is so essential in order for us to have any chance of bridging that gap at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's really hard to understand when people just adamantly refuse to be realistic about the systemic racism and what that looks like, right? It is a fact. You can stick your head in the sand all you want, but all it does is show your ass. So on page 57, she has this conversation. The section is called "What is a Literary Life?" And, look, obviously we host a book club. We both read a ton. Our kids read a ton. So this is not going to be new to anyone that we're like, this is great. But I pulled out this quote. Surprise, surprise. We're all shocked, right? It says, quote, "I consider a literary life one that unmistakably positions books as good friends and reading as an enjoyable way to grow and have fun." It goes on to say, "It isn't something to do or achieve. It's just a way of being. There's no quality check to pass or time quota to satisfy. All it takes is a seed of intention, a sprinkle of motivation, an encouraging adult, and a phenomenal book list. An indie bookshop and a library card are the only required tools." I would also say YouTube. There's so much available on YouTube now. You don't even have to make it to the library. If you've got a crap library that doesn't have these things, YouTube is there. Then she goes on to say, "Some magnetic bookmarks and a Kindle will make the whole thing official." Yeah, we definitely use our Kindle a lot, especially when we're traveling, right? I have so many books for the kiddo to read right now on Kindle. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was great, right? It's that idea. You don't have to come from a family that loves books. You don't have to have been raised to love reading. Just a seed of intention and a little bit of motivation, and you can do this. And as adults, you can 100% read, middle grades books or young adult books. There's nothing wrong with that. If you need something to be a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to get through, and still, there's loads of great literature out there written for that age. There's nothing wrong with starting there.
I think it's just solid advice. I mean, I think it's almost always my question when we're in a group and somebody says, like, my kid hates reading. My question is, what is the culture of reading in your home? Because when they see that we value reading and that it's a priority for us, and we develop these relationships with books and with characters, and when we create an environment where reading is a gift and an opportunity, as opposed to you have 30 minutes per day and then you have to log your book in the thing and you have to prove to me that you read it because I'm going to ask you questions. And I mean, how many times do we see people being like, where can I find questions to quiz my kid to see if they really read the book? And I'm like, okay. Or at dinner, you can be like, how's your book going? What's your character up to? If they look at you with this really blank expression, they haven't read the book, or better yet, kind of like the good, better, best example of that, right? The best example of that is, man, I didn't want to put my book down to make dinner tonight because I'm so enthralled with the main character. They're at this crossroads and I can't wait to see how it happens. What's going on in your book, right? And then they're like, oh, reading can be exciting. This is a thing. And so for us to create that culture of reading is just so tremendous.
Yeah. Now, I am going to interject and say, as the aggressive academic homeschooler, I do think that there is value to doing like novel studies and literary lessons around certain books, and you can come join us wherever we are, right? We've talked about that before. We're on Facebook, and you can drop in the comments and PM us and join our Patreon, all of that jazz. We can give you lots of different resources. Meagan runs a book club. I do a lot of other types of literary analysis specific classes, because the stuff that you read for pleasure, you don't read it in the same way, the stuff that you're actually reading to analyze. And so I do think there's some value in that. But I think there's a huge value in this idea of just the culture of reading for pleasure and like taking stuff in. And she goes on to talk about that, right? Well, one quote that I liked before we get to that was, every book is read one page at a time. And I think the same is true, for audiobooks. Meagan mentioned it here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We're big proponents of the fact that it is a perfectly valid form of reading. But an audiobook, you don't have to have 6 hours to listen to an audiobook. You need 10 minutes here and, 15 minutes there. It all counts, and that's fine. She has a couple other ideas or suggestions for how to create this literary life. The next one was prioritizing read alouds for the whole family. If anyone has listened to us for an extended period of time, read alouds are not my thing. It's like so not my thing. It's comical. But if your family enjoys it, by all means, like, go on with your bad self, right? And it's important to remember, like, read alouds are not just for little kids. Whatever silly societal norm someone has put out there, like, it doesn't matter if you have kids who are happy to sit around and listen to you, or you have a family and you want to do as a family thing, bonding. And maybe it's one of the few times you get to hang out with dad, and dad is willing to do some reading from a book or something. Like, do it. It's great. I won't be doing it, but you should totally do it.
Well, and if there's people listening who read alouds aren't their thing, I will say that clip where you said, like, I'm going to freely admit that read alouds are not my jam, got so many likes on TikTok compared to most of our other days. You are not alone.
Yeah. No, that's it. That is one of those things. Like, if you homeschool, you have to like this. Okay, the reality is not everyone likes the things that you have to like or you're supposed to like, and that's okay.
So true. All right. Well, once again, we got through Amanda's 8 pages of notes. So thank you for sticking with us. This book is so good, though. So I can completely understand how you end up with 8 pages of notes. It's a lot of self-restraint for me to not just basically reread the book in book club, because it's so good. And I'm never going to paraphrase it as well as Amber writes it. So I have to stop myself, like you said, from bringing the entire book as a quote, right? Just, you need the book. So 2 things as we wrap up. That's number 1. You need the book. The link is in our show notes. Go grab it. We would highly recommend a copy. Next week, we're going to be talking about the actual curated book list. And list is a really lousy word. We'll explain it better next week. But for the sake of brevity, list. And then number 2, we would love to invite you to join our Facebook group. It is, if you search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered on Facebook and hit groups, you'll find us. It's Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, Secular and Progressive as Fuck is the name of our group. So we stand out, especially right now. I mean, the US is just in turmoil. Did you see that Trump took over the Kennedy Center now and made himself like, what the fuck? Like, I can't. So,
grand chairman of all arts. And then all of the artists are like, never mind, I cancel.
They've all left. Exactly. And so I'm like, yeah, because when I think art, that's exactly the. Anyway, we need community. We need community. We need to be together. We need to support one another. We need a safe place to ask questions when you have a question like, am I supposed to be teaching my kid the Gulf of freaking America? I mean, come hang out with us. You can ask that question in a safe spot without some Trump trained person being like, of course you should. This is now the official name, right? Because we're seeing that in other groups. We're with you. It's awful. The group is called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered because it's named after the podcast, and we are homeschool moms. So that's where the name comes from. All genders are welcome. Everybody is welcome. Come join us, have conversation, make a friend. We can't wait to see you over there. So thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next week. We're going to be continuing our discussion of this book. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.